Listen up. It's time for a politically entertaining exclusive interview.
Today's guest has many titles. He's a professor, historian, author, and he's a playwright. He's also the director of the Martin Luther King Research and Education Institute. His autobiography of Martin Luther King, the audio version, even won a Grammy in 2000. Dr. Clayborne Carson, thank you for making time for us today, sir.
Good to talk to you. Thank you.
I wanted to jump right in with a question on Martin Luther King. In my opinion, when I look at the civil rights being portrayed, it always seems like it's two different sides. There's the retaliate with violence side that's portrayed. I guess you can, kind of point to Malcolm X. And then there's the nonviolent, just resist with peacefulness side. I read your book, Martin's Dream, and you said you were attracted to the SNCC and their peaceful, nonviolent tactics. What about their tactics attracted you to them versus the, I guess, more violent responses on the other side?
I don't see it the same way you do, as this one side or the other. It seems like, you're talking about people on the one end of the spectrum who believe in nonviolence as a philosophy of life, and I think that's always been a very small proportion of the population. And on the other side, those who believe in violent revolution, and that's also a very small number of people. And in between are the rest of us. I have met very few people who believe in nonviolence as a philosophy of life, and I've met very few revolutionaries. A lot of people like to use the rhetoric of revolution or the tactic of nonviolence, and that's where most of us are. If you participate in any kind of a massive social movement, and certainly the African American freedom struggle is one of the most massive social movements, you'll find that most people are arrayed along that spectrum, and depending on what time of life they're in, whether they're young or old, whether they're male or female, nonviolent tactics make a lot of sense, especially when you're facing Bull Connor's police or Jim Clark's troopers in Selma. Malcolm X about picking up a gun and defending yourself. Malcolm X was saying that in New York. He wasn't saying that in Selma, Alabama. When he said Selma, Alabama, he didn't face up to the Alabama state troopers. So I think that a lot of this is about rhetoric and about ego. A lot of men who believe that they're potential revolutionaries talk about picking up the gun, but very few people in any kind of massive social struggle have ever picked up the gun. The Black Panther Party was one of the few, and that was a major step that they took in 1966 when they started to talk about armed self-defense. And you saw the kind of retaliation that came down on the Black Panther Party. They were decimated during the next couple of years. So I think that when we talk about, to me, the most important thing is, are you in the struggle or are you not in the struggle? If you're in the struggle, there's lots of roles for people at every level of the struggle. There's people who are willing to go to jail. There's people who are willing to donate money. There's people who, like Rosa Parks, who refused to give up her seat on a segregated bus. And then there might be a few people who are willing to pick up the gun. And all of those are necessary parts of any kind of massive struggle.
As you answered that, I have to agree that seems like a very sensible answer. I guess it just seems like a lot of times the two sides are the ones that are portrayed more so than how you say the in the middle. You talked about Malcolm X and how he didn't face, Selma, Alabama, and what was going on in Birmingham. The things he said was in New York. And that really helps me transition to my next question. I feel like Martin Luther King is one of the most celebrated men in American history. But at the same time, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, at the same time, at times it seems like he kind of gets, I don't want to say disrespected, but misrepresented at times when some people try to make the point of reverse racism and argue against things like affirmative action. They'll inject Martin Luther King and say, well, Dr. King said we shouldn't even judge on race or color. We should only judge on content or character. And conversations I have with people at times, they like to compare him to Malcolm X and say, well, I like Martin Luther King, but I more agree with Malcolm X, and I really don't feel like King was as quote-unquote real as Malcolm X. Am I too hard when I criticize people like that, or?
Well, to me, again, a lot of that is just rhetoric. It doesn't have to do with reality. The question is, when you have a chance to join a struggle to free African American people, the question becomes, what contribution are you going to make to that struggle? Are you going to sit on the sidelines and say, well, I don't believe in nonviolence, so I'm not going to join that sit-in over there, but I'm just going to sit on the sidelines and watch.
Okay.
And so for me, the question I always ask is, when someone says, well, I agree with Malcolm X rather than Martin Luther King, but the question is, what are you doing? Are you becoming part of the struggle, or are you sitting on the sidelines? Because I'd rather have the person who is say, I'm committed to nonviolence, but I'm willing to risk my life to try to make a positive change in society, rather than the person who's saying, well, unless everybody else is well, I guess the question would be, if everyone else started picking up the gun, would you pick up the gun and join the struggle? Because anyone can rhetorically say, oh, I'm on the side of Malcolm X in that struggle. But if you are in Mississippi and Alabama in 1965, that's an irrelevance, because there is no violent resistance, because it would be crushed at that time. But a lot of people picked up the gun in Mississippi and Alabama. My dad always had guns in the house. I mean, that's a lot of people grow up with that, and it's not an either or. It's what works in the situation you happen to find yourself in. And a lot of people, just thinking back into the slave times, how many of us imagine us to be, oh, well, if I had been back in slavery, I would have been the Nat Turner.
We hear that conversation all the time.
Yeah, and that 99% of them would not have been the Nat Turners.
Correct.
Of that time. So it's easy to kind of have this imagination, so that it makes you feel good. But when it actually comes down to the, are you in it or are you not? You're not.
That's such a great point, Professor Carson. And I want to jump in here with a question for you. These questions flow into each other so well. I just want to know your thoughts on today's generation of young people, particularly African Americans, that don't exercise their right to vote after all the hard work that you and followers of Dr. King and people who have been in the civil rights struggle put in all those years ago. What does that really say to you that, like you said, whether it be violent or nonviolent, lives are put on the line, that we could have the right to vote, and that there's a generation of people that are out there that are just like, well, I may vote, I don't like the candidates, What is that? How does that make you feel? What would you say to those people?
Well, that again gets to that question of of when you have a chance to make a difference, do you make that difference? And, voting is even on the other side. If you talk about that spectrum from nonviolence to violence, voting is simply something that you do once every year or so, sometimes every 2 years, every 4 years for president. It takes an hour, perhaps, out of your time. It's definitely on the nonviolent side, and it makes a difference. So anyone who says that they're in favor of the liberation of black people and doesn't bother to go down and cast a ballot, I don't even take seriously. Because, if you are a citizen of this country, or even if you don't believe that you're a citizen of this country, then you've got another problem. Then you should be working on that question. But if you believe that you have citizenship rights and you don't exercise them, then you have no grounds for complaining about anything, because that's the easiest thing to do. That's the easiest contribution you'll ever be able to make to making the world a better place. Now, you can say there's no difference between the two political parties, but there is. There's always going to be, there might not be enough of a difference, between a Hillary Clinton and a Donald Trump, but it's enough of a difference to make, for example, on the question of health care. I believe that health care should be a right. So that's enough of a reason for me to vote for a candidate who is moving in that direction, as opposed to someone who is moving in the opposite direction of making it something that if you don't have the money, you don't get it. So I think that those differences that do exist are enough to make a difference in the lives of lots of people. And I think it's up to us to become educated on those differences and certainly make judgments about candidates that are based on more than about personality and who I liked and all that kind of stuff. That to me is pretty irrelevant. I think that what matters are the issues that divide the candidates, and being aware of those issues and making a choice based on which of those candidates comes closest to fitting your goals for what you want to see in this country.
And that's a great answer, and you actually answered part of my second question, which is, based on the current two-party system, I think you kind of alluded to this, but which one do you feel like is most reflective of the triumphs of the civil rights movement, and what changes do you want to see in our political system going forward that you feel like would be better served for all citizens of this country?
Well, unfortunately, that we're in a situation where the Democratic Party, for all of its flaws, is the party that brought about the civil rights reforms in the 1960s. The Republican Party, since that time, has gone crazy. There was a time when the Republican Party and the Democratic Party could reasonably compete for, and wanted to compete for, the black vote. But as you well know, the Republican Party made a conscious decision in the 1960s to go away from being the party of Lincoln to being the party of resistance to government. And the majority of white Southerners left the Democratic Party and went over to the Republicans, and they're the ones who call the shots right now. And that's an unfortunate situation. I wish we had a two-party system in which both political parties were competing for the black vote by trying to deal with the consequences of long-term racism and trying to heal the wounds of segregation and slavery. But that's just not the case. And so unfortunately, I think someone once said that the Republican Party at one point was the island and everything else was the sea. Well, now it's the Democratic Party. Now, I think that we can push the Democratic Party to not take the black vote for granted, but the notion of giving the vote to the Republicans in order to punish the Democrats just doesn't make any sense to me.
And that's something we've actually talked about on the early episode. It really frustrates Frank the most that there seemingly is no outreach from the Republicans to the black community. Now,
I think just what's going on right now with the suppress the vote efforts in a lot of, especially in the southern states, where they're trying to suppress the black vote in order to. Now, there's an easy solution to that. If the Republican Party were punished for doing that, both political parties should be out there trying their best to expand the electorate by bringing in people who want to participate in the vote, and not setting up barriers like, if you've ever been convicted of a felony, you can't ever vote again. Making it easier for people who move from place to place to vote. All of these things, not having extensive voter ID laws that discriminate especially against poor people or elderly people. All of these things should be part of the agenda of both political parties. That should be the basic policy of any political party would be, we want your vote and we want you to vote. And anything that goes against that should be punished at the ballot box. So, and if that happened, if the Republican Party were punished for that, it would never happen again. The message would get through that you cannot win elections by discouraging one group of people from voting.
We are speaking with Dr. Clayborne Carson. Again, he is director of the Martin Luther King Research and Education Institute. For more information on that, you can visit kinginstitute.stanford.edu. Last month, during the Super Bowl halftime show, Beyonce had a lot of people talking about the Black Panthers. And I think a lot of people were confusing this current Black Panther Party with the original Black Panther Party. Can you speak to what is the major difference between the original Black Panther Party versus today's Black Panther Party?
Well, today's Black Panther Party is pretty much irrelevant. I mean, we're not talking about a major social force out there. The Black Panther Party of the 1960s was probably the urban equivalent of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. That is, they were the group that had the dynamism and the appeal to young people that brought in just hundreds and thousands of people to support them, because they just captured the imagination of young people of that period. And when we think back to that time, that was that was probably the most promising political effort of the mid-1960s. Now the Black Panther Party made a lot of mistakes, and I think I think the recent documentary, it's quite clear that, as I put it in the documentary, some of the leaders did not, live up to the responsibilities of leading that group. And I think that to some degree, we can go back and offer a critique of the Black Panther Party, but one of the things that can't be criticized was the courage of the people in it, and the willingness to stand up to authority, the willingness of people to, rather than simply respond after the fact about police mistreatment. It was the policy of the Black Panther Party at the beginning to patrol the police. If you saw somebody pulled over to the side of the road who was black by a policeman, pull up and observe. And even that was a radical act of saying, I am going to watch what you do. And that is my right. And also it's my right to carry a weapon. And that had an impact. Now it looking back, I think that it was quite clear also that the police were going to retaliate against that. And I think probably the worst thing is that the rhetoric kind of got out of hand. That sometimes the rhetoric gets ahead of the reality of, if you talk revolution and you're not prepared for revolution, that's a mistake. Because the response will be as if you were revolutionaries. And the Black Panther Party was not actually a revolutionary movement. It was maybe preparing for a revolution, but I don't think anyone would claim that they were ready for the revolution. And that was a mistake. It got a lot of people killed.
That Black Panther documentary that you appeared in, I saw it last month on PBS, and I'm not sure if you're aware of a letter that Elaine Brown, former Black Panther member, she wrote pretty much calling it, quote, a disappointment. She condemned it, and it was shocking at times. She felt like the documentary didn't do the Black Panther Party justice.
Well, I know Elaine. And I've known her for many years. And I think she's like a lot of the people in the party who, if they don't make the historical document, if they don't make the documentary, they're not going to be satisfied with it, because how could you be? How could someone like Stanley Nelson, who was not a part of the party, make an accurate description? But that's the nature of history, is that the participants, they get their chance. Elaine Brown wrote her book, and I encourage people who want to see another version of the Black Panthers, read her book. It's a wonderful narrative. But I can tell you that there's lots of people who disagree with her book. So, you're never going to have one account that's going to satisfy everyone. And there have been other documentaries about the Black Panther Party, and I hope there will be more in the future, because there were a lot of things left out of the documentary. There was nothing about the dispute with the US organization that led to the killings on the UCLA campus. There was very little actually about the what I would call the down years of the party going into the 1970s. It really emphasized the spirit of the party. It was more, if you want to learn about the Black Panther Party, David Hilliard has a book about his experiences. Huey Newton wrote Revolutionary Suicide. There's plenty of other accounts, and I don't believe that anyone should go to a film and think that they are learning an accurate version of history. They're learning a version of history.
That's very important. He is the history professor at Stanford, along with the Black Panther documentary that he appeared in. You've also appeared in Freedom on My Mind, Citizen King, Have You Heard from Johannesburg, and Freedom Riders. You can also purchase his book, Martin's Dream, which is a memoir, My Journey and the Legacy of Martin Luther King, where he tells a great story of a 19-year-old Clayborne Carson attending the March on Washington and trying to make his way back home to New Mexico. It was not a straight shot, to say the least. Dr. Carson, We really want to thank you for taking the time to make for us at Politically Entertaining.
It's